light and life. You have the words of everlasting life. Alleluia, 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 alleluia.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the 14th chapter of the Holy Gospel according to Luke. On a Sabbath, Jesus went to dine at the home of one of the leading Pharisees, and the people there were observing him carefully. He told a parable to those who had been invited, noticing how they were choosing the places of honor at the table. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not recline at table in the place of honor. A more distinguished guest than you may have been invited by him, and the host who invited both of you may approach you and say, "Give your place to this man." And then you would proceed with embarrassment to take the lowest place. Rather, when you are invited, go and take the lowest place, so that when the host comes to you, he may say, "My friend, move up to a higher position." Then you will enjoy the esteem of your companions at the table, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Then he said to the host who invited him, "When you hold a lunch or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your wealthy neighbors, in case they may invite you back and you have repayment. Rather, when you hold a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Blessed indeed will you be because of their inability to repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
I came across an article in Bloomberg Business Week, not my normal reading. The article appeared in July of 2007. It was entitled, "Where You Sit is Where You Stand." Now strain yourself a little bit. It's a little bit about symbolism. Where you sit is where you stand. This person who did research on about 40,000 corporate executives did it all in the boardroom. He watched where people sat. The leader of the boardroom generally would sit at the chair at the end of the board table opposite the exit door so that nobody would sneak up behind him. And then he started looking around at the people who would sit on the opposite side of the table from him. Well, what he did was he began to recognize there were about 7 personalities around that board table. And he likened them to the 7 dwarves of Snow White and 7 Dwarfs fame. The ones who sat on the opposite side of the table were Grumpy and Doc. And their personality was such that the Grumpy were people who were argumentative at the table. And the Doc, at the other end, next to Grumpy, he was the one that was the know-it-all. And he loved to be able to speak up. 59% of those in the boardroom wanted to be on the right side of the leader at table. 59%. They're characterized by the dwarf Happy because they were the yes men. We call them the brown noses. They always wanted to make sure they get along with the boss. And you can only imagine the sneezy, the dopey, the sleepy, and the bashful in that table. But where you sit is where you stand. So now let's just take a break for a moment. Look where you are sitting. Notice that the lowest place of honor in most Catholic churches is where? The front row. The places of honor are usually on the end so that I can make an exit at communion. Or maybe it's because I want to be in the choir, no offense. But you're probably allergic to perfume, so you're up there. That's why you're called sneezy. And then there are others who just seek out a certain place, because that's where I've always sat, right, Nancy? We used to have a tradition here where we would, on a certain Sunday, we would call Switch Sunday, sit someplace else and get to know someone around you. Well, there's all kinds of reasons why we sit where we do. I wouldn't say that where you sit is where you stand, but we might give it some thought. Years ago, when the Grimm brothers wrote their story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, do you know he had no names for the dwarfs? That came later. In 1912, just for some history, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs appeared on Broadway. So they had to give names to the seven dwarfs so that everyone knew their part. Their names were, are you ready for this? Blick, Flick, Glick, Plick, Quee, Schmick, and Wick. Aren't we happy that Walt Disney came along in 1937 with Bashful, Doc, Sleepy, Grumpy, Dopey, Sneezy, and Happy? But someone didn't want to be outdone. In 1987, somebody put on another show, and they renamed the Seven Dwarfs, and thank goodness this didn't catch on. Their names were Biddy, Diddy, Fiddy, Giddy, Itty, Kitty, and Liddy. I'm going to stay with the Seven Dwarfs as I know them. This all leads into what Jesus was trying to tell us today. It comes from the book of Sirach. My children, conduct your affairs with humility. Now, why would you do that? Well, you conduct affairs with humility because it uproots arrogance, it uproots anger and greed, aggression, excessive pride, and ambition. So you might wonder, when I come into a room, do I say, "Here I am," or do you and I say, "Ah, there you are"? A world of difference in perspective and humility. Jesus was concerned that people take higher places at table than they really should. And he was also concerned about when you invite people to your table, do you do it because of maybe it's your repayment, or you're looking for them to repay you? Notice that the blind, the crippled, the lame, they can't repay you. Those are the ones that Jesus is saying, true humility will recognize who to invite. That sounds pretty rough, but it comes back to where you sit is where you stand. Our value doesn't come from how others view us anyway. Our success is due not to what others can do for us. Our value, our success, comes from our relationship to our center, our God. That is humility. So today we're going to have a baptism of two children that will recall our initial humility, because these parents, bringing this child into their home, they're giving all of their legacy to their child, to Colt, Eli, and to Andre Alexander. But they want more for their child. They want this child to be called a child of God, too. so they can receive the legacy that God promises. So they come very humbly. One is sleeping. The other one is also sleeping. We'll awake them because I've asked both of them, can you do the backstroke? That will wake them up. For us, I want you to be alerted to the fact that at the end of Mass, there are two opportunities that are coming up this next weekend to really put humility in proper perspective. How are we going to get engaged in our parish for opportunity/information weekend? And number two, there's an opportunity to get involved in a faith-based ministry that we're sharing with many, many churches in the Gresham area to collect food for the poor and for poor families. So let us now stand as I invite the Davis and the Cerrone family to come forward with their child.